Welcome to Millennium Counseling Center's podcast, where each week we go in depth into all things mental health, addiction recovery, and being our healthiest and happiest self. Enjoy. A lot of our clients are not necessarily pursuing their own recovery, but trying to figure out how to support a spouse, a loved one, family member, friend that's going through their own recovery process. What are you seeing when those clients come in terms of how they're struggling and what are they trying to figure out?
I think one of the difficult things as someone who is dealing with addiction or recovery as a family member is kind of balancing the support. And yet, many times when somebody's been in active addiction, the people around them that has also affected have been hurt. They've lost trust. They have some resentment. So trying to balance, being true to yourself and able to kind of express how things affected you and how your feelings are around that, and yet also giving the person the best chance to actually live a life in recovery and sobriety. I think that the challenge of that is to be able to do both of those at the same time, particularly since everyone wants this person to be healthy. So everybody has the same goal, but that can be confusing for family members, spouses, partners, folks like that to be able to kind of really, give support, but also feel like they're being authentic themselves.
Yeah. Well, and for most people, whether it's weeks or months prior, there was a lot of out of control behavior and things for a lot of families can be very chaotic. And so, yeah, some of those early kind of times in recovery, there still is that kind of emotional energy around what it was like when they were trying to get them help. And so, yeah, I hear what you're saying in the sense of how do you kind of both feel your residual feelings around what it was like before they got into recovery while also trying to help them look forward and be positive to give themselves the best chance for success.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all about rebuilding, right? From both sides. It's rebuilding trust and transparency and trying to work with some things that had happened in the past, feelings and thoughts and conversations that were hurtful, while also really trying to make sure that this person has the best chance to live in recovery. I think, one of the things we see quite a bit is that for the person who's in that support role, they want to make sure the person understands everything that they did and how hurtful that was, and want to make sure that they're able to kind of say their part now that they've got their person kind of back into a more stable state of mind and not affected by any of these things, whether it's substances or whatever their thing was. I think that kind of a common way of thinking for people is that if they knew and felt how terrible this was for everybody else, that then they would feel bad about that and wouldn't then continue that behavior. But I'm not sure that's really what goes on in the mind of the person in recovery. I think there's a whole lot of shame and guilt and regret. And many times, because they're unable to express that in early recovery, the people around them think they're not feeling those things. And so they feel like there's a lack of that, and maybe that they need to help provide that and kind of let them know how painful this was. But really, I'd say 95% of the time, the person who is hardest on themselves and the person who has the most negative feelings about them and when they were in active addiction is the actual person in recovery.
So there's a lot of different programs for family members, FA, Families Anonymous, Al Anon, other programs. What are the objectives of those programs to help people in that supportive role?
I mean, I think getting out of the idea that they have to control the situation. And one of the terms you hear a lot is to detach with love. So recognizing that they want to be there and be supportive, but they can't be the one in charge of the person's recovery. And the thing that I will tell clients straight up is that we will work extremely hard to support you in your recovery, and we will go above and beyond what maybe the norm is for that. However, I will say straight to someone, I'm not going to work harder than you, and I'm not going to care about this more than you do. So I will match your work rate, your level of attention to this, how much focus you're putting on this, that I'm willing to match that, but I'm not willing to lead that, so that we're just have really open and transparent conversations about what they can expect from me and what I would expect from them if they really want to get healthy.
Yeah. And what would you say you're seeing with clients that are in that supportive role where there are kind of bumps in the road, right? There maybe is a slip or there is, they're just maybe not as attentive to what their loved one's emotional kind of journey has been like. How do you support somebody that's going through that?
Well, I mean, I think that it's very frustrating. I've had a number of people that I cared quite a bit about in my life who have gone through that. So I've been on both sides of that. And I think that that's really difficult to see someone heading down a path where it doesn't look like the outcome is going to be great. And, you feel like you know what needs to happen. So I guess the best thing they can do is express that to the person and help them try to understand, but doing it from a place of, I guess, of support. And the danger is that whether it's the family member or the person themselves, one of the things that over the years I've learned about people is as soon as people get defensive, they stop really hearing the message. They go straight into protection mode and they're kind of protecting their side of things. And so they can't really hear the message. And the message is that this is serious. There's a lot of work that needs to go into it. We are going to help you with resources and provide support. But, ultimately, this is your journey. And there's ways that you can go about that journey that make it more likely or less likely that you're going to end up with living a life of recovery. And on the sidelines, that's really hard to watch someone when you don't feel like they're, engaged at the level that they need to be because most folks understand how difficult this is.
Yeah. Well, and in my experience, whether it's with clients or within my own family, when those feelings and urges of wanting to take over or have more control are coming from a place of care and love, right? They want a good outcome. They want, the person to realize like what they see. And I guess in my work with clients as well as talking with family members, we have to learn another way to show care, another way that we show them that we love them and we want the best outcome, because the way that we're kind of ingrained in showing our care kind of works against the process. And I think that's ultimately what you're saying is when you start to kind of lean in and try to control the situation, if it's not going great, that tends to kind of make it even worse.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that it's an internal struggle that people have because, like I said, they want to be able to express how they've been feeling, how they were hurt, how this affected them, and also seeing how their life that they were living affected their life, the person's who's going through it. And sometimes, I think that a good word that I hear a lot is frustration because they feel like the person doesn't really realize these things. And sometimes that's true. And sometimes it's the shame and guilt and regret that don't allow that person to really acknowledge those things, even though internally, and we know this because the conversations that those people have are with us to tell us, like, kind of how much of that negativity is internal. And then when, as we're trying to support people to kind of move out of shame and guilt and regret, and then the people around them are adding that to the mix, we're kind of trying to push it in one direction and ultimately with all the right intentions, the family members, there's two things. One is they want to be able to express themselves, and two is they believe that this is what's going to be most helpful for the person. And ultimately, I think if people could really get inside of the person in recovery, they would realize the amount of negative self talk and kind of low self esteem that's going on within the person, even though you can't necessarily always see that from the outside because the reaction is more combative or defensive or something like that. So it doesn't appear like the person is owning their part of it, but most of the time they are. It just might be internal.
The early stages of recovery for everyone involved is tricky. It's normally not a straight line to success, and it involves a lot of kind of personal and relational emotional repair. And that's why conversations like this and listening to other things online and reading books and getting support can be really important to figure out all the nuances around it.
Yeah, and I think I'll point out too is those early stages of recovery, the first 30, 60, 90 days. are so difficult, right? Because they're not only trying to remain abstinent or do, whatever the thing is that they're working on, but then they're also dealing with the person themselves is dealing with the consequences that came from their previous behavior. So even though they may be changing the way they're living their lives and the way they're operating, the things that had happened before are now kind of all coming home for them to deal with. And so there can be, a feeling like I'm doing everything right, and yet I still have all these problems. But it's like a credit card bill, right? You spend the money and then 30 days later, that's when you have to pay for it. And that's how, in a broader sense, sometimes active addiction works.